In this exercise, we have to calculate the budget deficit and the debt to GDP ratio in period 1. The first term in our deficit expression here is the debt repayment. This term is very straightforward. The real interest rate is known. The real interest rate is 0.02. And initial debt, which is carried over from period 1, is equal to 500. Taxes minus government spending is what we call the government's primary deficit or surplus, depending on if it's negative. If taxes exceeds government spending, we say that there is a primary surplus. The government's income exceeds government spending. But what we also call taxes minus government spending is public savings. So in order to calculate the deficit, we need to know what the public savings are. In this economy, we know that total investments, which is also equal to total savings. In this economy, we know that total savings are equal to 90. And we know that the economy's total savings are the sum of private savings and public savings. What the government saves is the difference between taxes and spending. Private savings are also given, so we have only one variable that is our unknown variable. This we can solve. Private savings equals 120. As a result, public savings must be equal to minus 30. So taxes minus government spending is equal to minus 30. Therefore, in period 1, the deficit is 0.02 times 500 minus government's primary deficit. It is a deficit because government spending exceeds taxes. So if you take a calculator, you get that the budget deficit is equal to 40. Next, we have to calculate the debt to GDP ratio in period 1. How do we calculate the debt to GDP ratio in period 1? Well, we recall the formula for the debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio is given by the debt stock in period 1. So the debt to GDP ratio in period T can be expressed by the debt stock in period T relative to output in period T. This is equal to 1 plus the real interest rate minus the growth rate minus the output growth rate times the debt stock in period T minus 1 over output in period T minus 1 plus government spending in period T minus taxes in period T over output in period T. We're interested in the debt to output. We are interested in the debt to GDP ratio in period 1. Therefore, we write debt stock in period 1 over output in period 1. Notice there is no output growth, so G is equal to 0. We have 1 plus R times B. So we're in period 1. It says B, T minus 1. T is equal to 1. So we get debt stock in period 0, output in period 0, plus government spending in period 1, minus taxes in period 1, over output in period 1. Output in period 0 is unknown, but we know that there is no output growth. As a result, output in period 0 must be equal to output in period 1, which is just 675. So the debt to GDP ratio must be 1 plus 2%, which is 0.02. That is the real interest rate, times the initial debt in period 0. That is 500 over output in period 0. Remember, there is no GDP growth, so output in period 0 is the same as output in period 1. That is 675 plus the primary deficit. So we know that the government initially runs a primary deficit. What does that mean? That means that government spending exceeds taxes. And this we found earlier to be 30. And output is 675. If we calculate this, we get 0.8, which is 80%. Earlier, when we calculated the budget deficit, we found that the difference between taxes and government spending was minus 30. As a result, G minus taxes must be equal to plus 30. The debt to GDP ratio is 80%. That means that debt stock in period 1 accounts for 80% of the GDP.